A little girl gave her only cookie to a sad stranger, didn't know he was a millionaire CEO, and he'd change their lives forever. The wind whispered across the frostbitten grass, slicing through the empty park like a quiet warning of winter's cruelty. The benches were slick with morning dew that had begun to freeze, and the sky above hung heavy with thick gray clouds. It was the kind of cold that crept beneath your coat, past your bones, and curled up inside your chest. Kelly tightened the thin scarf around her neck, her breath visible in short, anxious bursts. One hand clutched a worn canvas tote slung over her shoulder, the other held tightly to the hand of her 3-year-old daughter, Molly. They walked slowly along the path, the park nearly deserted except for the squirrels darting among leafless trees. Kelly's face was pale, drawn with fatigue, her blonde hair tucked messily into a woolen cap. Her boots were scuffed, her jeans too thin for the season. Molly wore a coat one size too small, its zipper stuck halfway up, and the mittens on her hands did not match, but her eyes, bright, curious, kind, still searched the world as if it might offer something beautiful. They had nowhere to go. The landlord had changed the locks the night before, after 2 months of unpaid rent. Kelly had spent the night walking city blocks, carrying Molly when she grew tired, searching for warmth, for safety, for time. Now, in the quiet stillness of the park, she dropped down on the nearest bench and exhaled. From her tote bag, she pulled out a paper napkin. Wrapped inside was the only food they had, one chocolate chip cookie. Slightly crushed, slightly stale, but still sweet. She had bought it with the last of their change at a gas station before sunrise, hoping it would bring Molly a moment of comfort. "Here, baby," Kelly said softly, pressing the cookie into her daughter's tiny hands. "Breakfast." Molly looked at the cookie, then at her mother. "Are you not eating?" Kelly smiled weakly. "I already did, sweetheart. That's all for you." Molly hesitated. She took one bite, then held the cookie in both hands like it was something precious. As she chewed, her gaze wandered. Across the park, a man sat alone on another bench. He wore a dark coat that hung loosely on his frame, shoulders hunched forward, head bowed. From a distance he looked almost asleep, but something about the way he sat, the stillness, the heaviness, caught Molly's attention. She nudged her mother. "That man looks sad." Kelly followed her gaze. The man didn't move. He looked worn down, not just tired but broken. His hair was unkempt, his shoes muddy, and his face, what little she could see of it, was pale and sunken. "Don't stare, sweetheart," Kelly murmured, gently, but Molly had already slipped off the bench. "Molly," Kelly began, sitting up straight. Molly walked across the grass, the cookie still in her hand. She stopped in front of the man's bench, close enough that he would see her if he lifted his head. The man blinked slowly, realizing someone was near. He looked up and saw her. A little girl in a too-small coat, holding half a cookie, looking at him like she saw something that mattered. She extended the cookie toward him. "You look like you need a smile more than I need this," she said, her voice steady and sweet. "So you can have it." The man stared at her. He didn't speak. His eyes, hollow and rimmed with dark circles, welled with something too old for words. He reached out with trembling hands, took the cookie, and looked down at it like it was made of gold. Then his lips parted, and a single tear slipped down his cheek. Kelly reached them moments later, her breath catching as she saw the man holding the cookie. She opened her mouth to apologize, to say something, anything, but the man raised his eyes to hers, and for a moment none of them spoke. The wind shifted gently through the trees, and something changed. The cookie remained untouched in Jordan's hand, long after the little girl and her mother had walked away. He sat on the bench, the cold biting into his fingers, his breath rising in broken clouds. The words she had said echoed through him with quiet insistence. "You look like you need a smile more than I need this." Something about it, so innocent, so complete, had cracked something inside him. It was the first time in months that he had felt anything resembling warmth. His name was Jordan Carter, 35, founder and former CEO of a billion-dollar tech company that bore his name. For years, he had been one of the most celebrated minds in the industry, brilliant, relentless, unstoppable. But now, even the thought of who he had once been felt foreign. Just 6 months earlier, his world had ended in a sterile hospital room filled with the slow beep of machines and the scent of antiseptic. His wife, Elise, had battled ovarian cancer for 2 years. 2 years of hospitals, home nurses, second opinions, experimental treatments, and false hope. Through it all, she had smiled, had held his hand and told him everything would be okay, even when it was her pain that kept her awake through the night. She was the strongest person he had ever known, and when she slipped away in the early hours of a June morning, he had not cried, not at first. He had just sat there, holding her cooling hand, waiting for the moment to feel real. It never did. Instead, Jordan left everything. He walked away from the company, the board, the penthouse apartment they had filled with books and flowers and laughter. He didn't sell anything. He didn't explain. He just packed a backpack with a few essentials and disappeared from his own life. He had no plan. He didn't want one. What he wanted was to feel the numbness fully, to let it consume him, maybe even destroy him. There were days he did not speak to anyone. Days when the ache in his chest was the only thing reminding him he was still alive. And then came the girl with the cookie. It wasn't just the cookie, of course. It was the way she looked at him, unafraid, wide-eyed, as though he were someone worth seeing, worth helping. She hadn't asked who he was. She hadn't flinched. She just gave, without expecting anything in return. That small act of kindness should have meant nothing. But it didn't. Later that night, Jordan sat on the edge of a cot in a shelter, staring at the ceiling as the hum of nearby snores filled the air. His fingers still remembered the weight of that cookie. He had eaten it eventually, slowly, like it was sacred, like it was something left behind by a better version of himself. He closed his eyes and saw Elise's face. "You'll keep going," she had whispered, the last time she was strong enough to speak. "Even if it hurts, because someone out there will need what you still have to give." At the time, he had not believed her, but now, maybe he wanted to. The next morning, Jordan returned to the same park. He did not expect to see the little girl and her mother again, but he sat on the same bench, just in case. When they did not appear, he stood and walked, not because he had somewhere to go, but because standing still no longer seemed like enough. For the first time in months, a thought stirred in him. Not a plan, not a goal, just the beginning of a question. What if this wasn't the end of the story? He remembered what it felt like to build something from nothing. Years ago, he had coded the first prototype of his company's app in a coffee shop, drinking cold espresso and skipping sleep. He had done it because he believed in solving problems no one else wanted to touch. Because he believed in people. When had that belief vanished? When had he stopped thinking anyone else mattered? Now, he thought about the little girl. Molly, her mother had called her. He didn't know their story, but he had seen enough in their clothes, in the way the woman had held the child close, in the way she had not eaten the cookie herself. They were struggling, quietly, with dignity, just like he was. But unlike him, they had chosen to be kind anyway. That night, Jordan did something he hadn't done in a long time. He went to a public library and sat at a computer. He typed in his name, half expecting it to feel like looking at a stranger. The headlines were still there. CEO Jordan Carter. Missing. Silence from tech giant after founder's disappearance. Is Carter alive? He stared at his face on the screen and whispered, "I don't know." Then, slowly, he opened a document and began to write. Not code, not a resignation, a letter to himself. It began with a name, Molly. Rain fell in thin, steady sheets, soaking the pavement and blurring the city lights into soft halos. The kind of cold that followed a day like this did not bite. It seeped in, clinging to skin and sinking into bones. Kelly stood under the tiny overhang of a closed fast food restaurant, holding Molly close, her coat damp and her shoes squishing with every shift of her weight. Molly shivered in her arms, her nose pressed into Kelly's shoulder. Her little body was too cold, too still. Kelly whispered, "Just a little longer, sweetheart. The rain will let up soon." But they both knew it might not. The forecast had said rain all evening. They had nowhere to go. The shelter downtown was full again. The woman at the counter hadn't even looked up when she said it. Then, from the curtain of rain, a quiet figure approached. Jordan. He didn't say a word, just walked up with a large umbrella and a brown paper bag, then gently handed them both over. Kelly stared at him, suspicious. "Why are you doing this?" But before he could answer, Molly peeked out from her mother's arms, blinking through raindrops. Her eyes widened with surprise and a flicker of joy. "I miss you, cookie guy," she said, her voice soft, recognizing the quiet stranger from the park. Jordan's expression softened. He gave a small nod, a faint smile, then turned and walked back into the rain, without another word. Kelly watched him go, her chest tight with questions she couldn't quite shape. But when she opened the bag and saw warm sandwiches, fruit, and a small bottle of milk, she closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, "Thank you." Over the next several days, Jordan returned to the park, not to speak, not to intrude, just to sit quietly on a bench a few rows away. He watched Kelly work small, odd jobs, handing out flyers, collecting bottles, doing anything she could to keep Molly fed, and through it all, she smiled at her daughter like everything was okay, even when Jordan could see it wasn't. One afternoon, he noticed Molly had fallen asleep on a picnic bench, her coat rolled up as a pillow. Kelly was across the field talking to a man about dishwashing shifts. Jordan approached slowly, placed a carton of milk and a wrapped granola bar beside the little girl, and backed away before she stirred. He did it again, the next day, and the next. Then, one morning, as he placed the items down, a voice cut through the silence. "What are you doing?" He turned. Kelly was standing a few feet away, her face guarded, her hands clenched at her sides. "I saw you yesterday, and the day before that." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you following us?" Jordan shook his head. "No, I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" He took a breath, then spoke slowly. "For the cookie. That morning, I hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. I didn't think anyone could see me anymore. But she did." Kelly looked at him for a long moment, her breath visible in the chill air. "She gives pieces of herself to everyone," she said quietly. "I try to teach her not to, but she still does." "She saved me," Jordan said. Kelly didn't answer right away. Then she sighed, her shoulders lowering slightly. "Okay," she said, "but if you're going to keep showing up, maybe at least tell me your name." He hesitated. Then, "Jordan." She nodded once. "I'm Kelly." That was all. But something shifted in that moment. From then on, Jordan's quiet presence became part of their days. He never imposed, never lingered too long. Sometimes he'd sit on the bench across the way and read a book, or feed birds, or help carry something when Kelly's arms were full. And slowly, that fragile thread of connection began to hold. It wasn't charity, it wasn't rescue. It was gratitude, and something else neither of them could quite name. Winter settled in like a long sigh, cold and unforgiving. The wind grew sharper, the nights darker, and the spaces between small acts of kindness began to close. Jordan never spoke of where he came from, and Kelly never asked. Whatever shadows they carried, they didn't need to name them to understand each other. He showed up with a bundle of gently worn coats one afternoon, wrapped in a plastic bag. "Too small for me," he said simply, handing them over. One was just Molly's size, a red puffer with a missing button, but still warm. She squealed and wrapped herself in it, spinning in the frost. "It's red like cinnamon," she giggled. From then on, Jordan became a quiet presence in their lives. He took Molly to the library one weekend, watching her eyes grow wide at the rows of books, her little fingers trailing over spines as if they were made of treasure. He taught her how to use the self-checkout machine, and when she chose a picture book about astronauts, he sat beside her on the carpet and read it aloud. Kelly arrived just as he finished the last page, her eyes catching the moment through the glass door before she stepped in. "She doesn't usually sit that still for anyone," she said with a smile as they left. Jordan shrugged. "I guess she just likes planets." What Kelly didn't know was that he had spent the night before reading every children's book about space he could find online, just so he wouldn't get the facts wrong. A few days later, he handed her a note with a name and phone number. "It's a diner on 9th, small place, good people, owner's an old friend," he explained. "They need help in the mornings, told them you're dependable." Kelly stared at the paper. "Why are you doing this?" Jordan met her eyes. "Because you keep going no matter what." She got the job. The money wasn't much, but it was steady. Enough for better food, enough for real soap and shoes that didn't leak. She worked the early shift, and Jordan would walk Molly to school afterward. At first, Kelly resisted the idea, but Molly insisted. "He's safe, Mommy. He reads me books about stars." She had started calling him Mr. Cookie, then Cookie Guy, and finally, simply, Uncle Cookie. The nickname stuck. One morning, as Jordan helped Molly zip her coat, she looked up at him and asked, "Do you think sad people are just waiting for someone to share their snack with?" He blinked. "Maybe. I think you were sad before, but now you smile more." He did not respond, but something in his chest shifted. Day by day, step by quiet step, Jordan felt the darkness inside him loosen. Not all at once, but Molly's laughter, Kelly's strength, the smallness of their world made everything somehow feel bigger. He was no longer a ghost on a bench. He was part of something again. One evening, they all sat in the tiny rented room, sharing hot soup and crackers. The heat barely worked, and the window whistled with wind. But Kelly was humming, Molly was coloring stars, and Jordan was watching them both, his heart full in a way he hadn't felt in years. He had once built a tech empire with his mind. Now he was helping rebuild a life with his hands. And it mattered, more than anything ever had. The night was colder than usual, the sky draped in heavy clouds, the air still with the hush of something unsaid. Kelly had just returned from her shift at the diner, her hands red from scrubbing, her feet sore from hours of standing. Molly was asleep on the mattress they shared, her arms wrapped around her stuffed giraffe. Kelly tiptoed into the kitchenette to pour a glass of water, and that was when she saw it. Through the narrow window on the front steps of the building, Jordan sat alone, shoulders hunched, face buried in his hands. He was crying. Not the quiet kind, but the kind that broke you open, raw, silent sobs that made your whole body tremble. Kelly froze, her breath catching. She didn't call out. Didn't ask. Instead, she stepped back and closed the curtain gently, giving him his grief. The next morning, as the city stirred awake under a pale sun, Jordan found something tucked into the pocket of his coat, a small folded paper. On it, in simple handwriting, were the words, "Everyone has lost someone. You're not alone." He stared at it for a long time. Then, quietly, he slipped it into his wallet. That evening, as Molly drew space rockets on the floor, Kelly sat beside him on the creaky couch. The room smelled like cinnamon and dust. Jordan held the paper in his hand. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "I never told you who I really am." Kelly turned her head slightly. "My name is Jordan Carter," he said. "I used to run a tech company. You might have heard of it." She blinked. Wait, Jordan Carter?" He nodded. "I had everything once. $1 billion company, a penthouse, investors who hung on every word I said. But none of it mattered without Elise." Kelly's voice softened. "Your wife, she had cancer," he whispered. "Ovarian. Stage 4 by the time we caught it. She fought so hard, smiled every day, even when she couldn't get out of bed. I thought money could fix it. I tried everything." He paused. The room seemed to hold its breath. "When she died, I stopped caring. About the company, about people, about waking up in the morning. I walked out of my life with nothing but a backpack and a wallet I didn't open for months. I didn't want anyone to find me. I wanted to disappear." Kelly sat in silence, letting his pain settle between them. "Then your daughter gave me a cookie," Jordan continued, voice trembling. "And for the first time, I felt seen. She looked at me like I wasn't broken, like I was someone who could still matter." He wiped his eyes. "You never asked who I was. You just let me sit with you. You let me be someone without asking for anything in return." Kelly's hand found his on the couch. "Maybe," she said, "we both needed someone to see us without judgment." She looked down, then added, "The man I loved left when he found out I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready. I raised Molly alone. Lost my job, then our apartment. I tried to hold everything together with duct tape and prayers. And then you showed up." Jordan met her gaze. "If you could build an empire once," she said softly, "you can rebuild a life now, for something that matters more." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who had carried her daughter through storms, who had kept smiling even when she was breaking inside. And suddenly, everything didn't feel so lost anymore. They didn't kiss. They didn't hold each other. They just sat, their hands gently joined on the couch. Two people no longer afraid to be broken in front of each other. It was not a special moment. In the kitchen, they shared two people who had chosen to stay. The city was beginning to thaw, just barely. Slivers of pale sunlight broke through the overcast sky, touching the tops of wet buildings and turning snowdrifts into dirty puddles along the sidewalks. It was the kind of late winter morning where the wind still bit at your skin, but the promise of something gentler hung quietly in the air. Jordan stood in the lobby of the headquarters he once built, the familiar space both foreign and unchanged. He wore a blazer for the first time in over a year, the fabric stiff around his shoulders, like a memory trying to fit again. People looked up from their phones and monitors, blinking in disbelief. Some dropped their coffee cups. Whispers rushed like wind down the corridor. "Is that?" "Yes." Jordan Carter. He stepped into the elevator alone, the soft chime echoing louder than it used to. When he reached the executive floor, his pace was measured, not with the swagger of a returning mogul, but with the humility of someone who had seen what really mattered and what really didn't. He walked the corridor slowly, his shoes clicking against the polished marble floors. Familiar offices passed him, some with new nameplates, some still bearing his own titles that had remained untouched. In his absence, the company had grown wealthier, but colder. Profits had soared, but purpose had dimmed. What once was a place built on innovation and passion had become, at least in part, a machine, efficient but soulless. That would change. He called a meeting with the board, his old colleagues, many of whom had assumed he would never return. They sat stiffly, guarded, unsure of what to expect. Jordan stood at the head of the long oak table and spoke without theatrics. "I didn't come back to reclaim what I left. I came back to rebuild what we lost. I know how to build companies, but now I want to build meaning. It's time we led with more than numbers. It's time we led with values." The room was silent for a long moment. Then someone cleared their throat. Someone else nodded slowly. Not everyone agreed, but no one could deny the presence of a man who had stared into the abyss and returned with something deeper than ambition. Purpose. That evening, Jordan climbed the rickety stairs to the cramped apartment where Kelly and Molly had been staying. The building groaned with age. Paint flaked from the walls. The hall smelled of damp carpet and reheated soup. Kelly opened the door, her eyes wary but steady. Jordan stepped inside. The room was colder than outside. The heater was barely working. Molly, bundled in 3 layers of sweaters, lay asleep on the mattress, coughing in her dreams. "I have a place," Jordan said gently. "It's quiet, it's clean, there's a fireplace. No one's lived there since—" He didn't finish. Kelly didn't ask. She crossed her arms. "We don't need charity." "It's not charity," he said. "It's a roof for a little girl who deserves to sleep without shaking, and for her mom, who deserves to stop holding her breath for once." Kelly looked at Molly, curled up like a question mark in her sleep. They moved in the next day. The apartment Jordan brought them to was not a mansion. It was warm, safe, lived in. There were rugs that muffled footsteps, books that lined the shelves with quiet companionship, and a fireplace that crackled with something like peace. Jordan stayed in the guest room. He filled the fridge with things Molly liked: strawberries, tiny cheese wheels, cartons of milk. Every morning, he made hot chocolate with exactly 3 marshmallows. He read Molly's space books at night, ones she picked out herself. She started drawing pictures of the 3 of them: her, Mommy, and Uncle Cookie, first in pencil, then in crayon, then in color so bright it made Jordan's throat tighten. Kelly watched, at first with suspicion, then with surprise, then with something softer. Jordan never asked for thanks. He never tried to take over. He just showed up, again and again. Quiet, present, real. One night, Kelly came into the kitchen to find him sewing a button back onto Molly's favorite coat. He looked up, startled. "He said it's her favorite," he said. Kelly didn't speak. She just stepped forward and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. Later, as they stood in the hallway with the lights dimmed and Molly finally asleep, she whispered, "You're not doing this because you feel guilty, right?" Jordan looked at her, his eyes steady. "No. I'm doing this because for the first time in years, I want to." She exhaled, a real exhale, the kind that comes when the body finally remembers what it feels like to be safe. The spring sunlight spilled through the tall windows, casting soft golden rays across the living room floor. The air felt different that morning, lighter, almost like it had been cleansed by the long, cold winter. Birds chirped outside for the first time in weeks, their melodies weaving through the open window like delicate threads of hope. The faint smell of warm bread and sugar filled the apartment. Jordan had just taken a fresh batch of cookies out of the oven, and their sweet aroma wrapped the home in comfort. Molly sat cross-legged on the floor, humming a tune as she colored, a sea of crayons scattered like confetti around her. Her tongue peeked out slightly in concentration as she scribbled bright colors onto the page with childlike urgency. Kelly stood nearby, folding laundry on the couch, watching the scene with quiet contentment, her hands moving on instinct while her mind lingered on the sound of her daughter's joy. Suddenly, Molly leapt to her feet, eyes wide with excitement. "Look what I made!" she exclaimed, holding up her drawing with both hands, beaming with pride. It was a picture, bold, vibrant, brimming with imagination. 3 stick figures stood beneath a bright blue sky. There were yellow stars, fluffy clouds, and cookies raining down like blessings. One figure had long blonde hair, another wore a pink dress with matching shoes, and the tallest figure had glasses and held a tray piled high with baked goods. At the top, in wobbly, determined handwriting, it read, "Me, Mommy, and Uncle Cookie, who makes the best cookies in the world." Jordan froze when he saw it. The simple joy in the picture hit him harder than any boardroom success ever had. His throat tightened. He reached out and took the paper gently, staring at it, as though it held the key to a part of himself he had forgotten. "I love it," he said softly, his voice gravelly with emotion. Kelly walked over, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and leaned closer to look at the drawing. She smiled faintly, but there was a heaviness in her eyes, something tender and raw. "She sees you as family," she said quietly. Jordan looked at her, his gaze shadowed by emotion. "I'm not trying to take anyone's place," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I'm not her father. I know you've done all of this on your own. But I want to stay, not because I think you need me, not because I want to replace what's been lost, but because I've never wanted to belong somewhere this much. When she laughs, when you smile, it's the only time I feel like I'm alive again. Like I've finally found something worth staying for. Since Elise, I haven't felt that." Kelly's breath caught at the mention of his late wife. Her eyes shimmered. "I used to think that letting someone in again meant I was forgetting, that it meant erasing what I had been through. But now," she paused, steadying her voice, "now I think healing isn't forgetting. It's making room for joy again, even when it's scary." Jordan reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. She placed hers in his. "I don't want to be someone who just passed through your life," he said. "I want to be someone who stays." And as Kelly blinked, the first tears fell, not from pain, not from fear, but from the soft, quiet truth that, for the first time in a long while, she was ready to believe in tomorrow. The kitchen smelled like vanilla, brown sugar, and something impossibly comforting. A soft tune played from the radio, the kind of old song that made you want to sway without knowing why. Outside, the world moved as usual, cars passed, birds sang, but inside this small home, time felt still, in the best way. Jordan stood at the oven, wearing a flour-dusted apron, carefully sliding a tray of cookies onto the counter. His hands, once used to commanding boardrooms, now found a deeper rhythm in measuring and mixing and kneading. There was a peace to it, this ritual, this simplicity. Across the room, Molly sat at the table, her brow furrowed as she traced letters into her notebook, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. Kelly, by the window, was arranging a bouquet of sunflowers and wild daisies in a mason jar. She turned slightly and caught sight of Jordan dusting powdered sugar over the warm cookies. "You know," she said with a teasing smile, "you take these more seriously than your investors' meetings." Jordan grinned. "Because these don't crash if someone forgets to preheat the oven." Just then, Molly dropped her pencil, leapt up and sprinted toward them with unfiltered glee. She wrapped her arms around Jordan's waist, then reached up to grab Kelly's hand too, pulling them together into one big squeeze. "Daddy's cookies are the happiest cookies in the whole wide world," she declared proudly. Jordan looked down, eyes soft, and bent to press a kiss on Kelly's forehead. She leaned into him gently, her hand resting on his chest, where his heartbeat thudded, strong and steady. Behind them, taped to the fridge, was a well-worn drawing. 3 smiling stick figures beneath a blue sky, and rainbow-colored stars. Above them, written in childlike scrawl, "Home is where someone shares their cookie with you, even before they know your name." No gold, plated nameplate, no applause, just the warmth of the oven, the sound of love laughing, and 3 hearts that had once been broken, now whole again. Not because of fate, but because they had chosen each other, and that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, then maybe you too believe, like we do, that kindness can still change the world, that a single cookie, a quiet act of love, can lead to something as big as family. If you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of what really matters, then we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where every tale is a gentle nudge to the soul, and a reminder that even in the darkest winters, love can still rise like warm bread on a Sunday morning. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.